Nobody's ever accused you of that. All right, I'd like to call to order the regular meeting of the Board of Directors of Joshua Basin Water District for Wednesday, May 16th. Please rise and join Gary. You can do it again, Gary.
Sure.
In the pledge.
Please follow after me. I
Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. Determination of a quorum.
Madam President, all 5 directors are here. You have a quorum.
Thank you. Item number 4, approval of the agenda. Do I have a motion to approve the agenda?
I would move that we approve the agenda.
Is there a second?
Second?
All in favor? Aye. Is anyone opposed? Unanimous. Public comment, item number 5. This is the time set aside for public comment on any district-related matter not appearing on the agenda. Government code prohibits the board from taking action on these items, but they may be referred for future consideration. Please state your name and limit your comments to 3 minutes. Any public comments? Mr. Public? Seeing none, we will move to item number 6, the consent calendar. Matters on the consent calendar are considered routine in nature and will be enacted in a single motion without discussion. Any board member or member of the public may request that an item be removed from the consent calendar and acted on separately. And there are 4. The draft meetings of April 18, 2018, draft minutes of April 25, 2018, the draft minutes of April 30th, 2018, and Resolution 18-985, the reserve fund policy, which we discussed at the last meeting. So do I have a motion?
I move that we approve the consent calendar.
Is there a second?
Second?
I think I have to recuse myself from A. I wasn't here,
Okay.
so can I just so you guys have to approve A without me, I believe.
I think it's
Okay.
no. Okay.
Okay, all in favor of everything except A, well, the 3, not including A?
Aye.
Do I have a
Aye.
motion?
So moved.
Okay, is there a second?
Second.
Okay, for everything, for B, C, and D, all in favor, aye?
Aye.
Aye. And Rebecca, I guess we don't need you for the other thing. Did we get them all?
Yeah, you're good.
She said we got them all. Update on the hazard mitigation plan, Gary Sturdivant. All right, Gary, you're up again.
I'm up. Well, good evening. I just wanted to talk about the hazard mitigation plan for a little bit. We're moving forward, and we got some feedback from the district today. I met with some of the staff this morning, and we got more feedback on what happened here in the Landers earthquake of 1992. So that's good. That'll go into the plan. But I want to direct your vision to the screen there. And part of the hazard mitigation plan, I thought this would be interesting to you, is the 100-year floodplain and the shake intensity of earthquakes at this area. So this is the 100-year, 500-year flood map right here, and the blue is the 100-year floodplain, and the red area is the 500-year floodplain. So it was kind of concerning because this office is in the middle of that, and so is the maintenance yard. So I'm doing a hazard mitigation plan for a place called, well, it's already done, Orchard-Dale Water District in Whittier. And when I ran their 100-year, 500-year flood map, FEMA says, is that building on stilts? And I said, no. And he said, oh, well, it's going to be 8 feet deep, so it's going to be up to the rafters. So I don't think it's that intense here, but it is in the floodplain. And staff has said every time there's a little rain, the street out front and the parking lot fills up pretty quickly. So that's of concern, and that's in the hazard mitigation plan. And go ahead and next one. This is the 7.8 earthquake on the San Andreas Fault done by USGS. The darker blue, kind of purplish blue color is an intense shaking area, and the lighter blue is a little less. But that is the intense shaking for this area.
Those are the fault lines.
Pardon? Oh,
black
those,
ones.
and the black lines are the fault lines that are not, of course, the San Andreas fault. But you're right there. There's one coming right across the lower part there, all the way across your district, and that fault line is not far from your offices either. So you're in a good spot.
Going right across. Oh my
Earthquake
God.
and flood, wow. What's
So-
that white area at the bottom?
Yeah, it's quite an area. I know when I
Here?
did.
The light colored area kind of in the center bottom?
Right here? That's
Yeah.
just a lighter.
That's just a
shade.
lighter area. That red area off to the right, that little round area, that's really intense shaking.
Oh, wow.
So that is a harder shaking. It all has to do with the ground materials and like Los Angeles Basin is alluvial fans, and city of San Bernardino is really bad because it's on liquefaction too because of the Bunker Hill Basin. I grew up in San Bernardino, and I knew that when they built the car dealerships there years ago, and they started to put underground hoists in the repair shops, and they filled up with water immediately as soon as they dug the hole. The post office that was downtown San Bernardino, or the downtown post office, they called it, but it was on South East Street, and that had wells or pumps in there to pump the basement out because it would flood all the time. And there used to be super wells in San Bernardino that just pumped water out of the basin, the Bunker Hill Basin, and pumped it out to the Santa Ana River to try and lower the groundwater. My mother always talked about where Inland Center Mall is in San Bernardino. That used to be a lake. When she was a kid, that was a lake. So liquefaction in downtown San Bernardino is quite a focus. And a lot of areas in the city of San Bernardino, that Bunker Hill Basin goes from Colton all the way through Highland. And it's kind of a tipped bowl towards San Bernardino and Colton. So it is quite a large underground aquifer, but it causes its own issues. There's lots of water there, but it causes its own issues. But anyway, we're moving forward. We have a meeting next week with your advisory committee, and we'll present these maps to them and some of the things that we found, and hope to have the hazard mitigation plan draft to you for a soft adoption on the June 20th board meeting, and from there it will go on to Cal OES, and Cal OES sometimes recently have been really, really good. I got one done in 3.5 weeks. It totally shocked me. We've gone from 5 years to 3.5 weeks. And, quite impressive. But, so once it goes there, then it goes to FEMA for adoption by FEMA. I've got one that the state approved right now, Orchard Dale. They've approved it in 3.5 weeks, and it went to FEMA, and they kicked it back. And I redid it, and I sent it back, and now they want to talk. And I went, well, you only had three talking points the first time, and now you have several things they said that they want to talk about. And I went, okay. So it'll be revised again, and that's why we do a soft adoption with the board, not a hard adoption, not by resolution. Once it's adopted by FEMA, and FEMA approves it, then we'll do, it's always contingent at that time. It's not totally approved until we get a resolution from the board of directors. Okay? Any questions?
Any questions? Any questions from the public? From them, any questions from the board?
Are you going to pass those maps out for us?
I can, well, they have them here.
Okay.
Yeah, they have them here, because I gave them to them this morning at the meeting.
I'd like to look at both of those.
Yeah.
They're hard to see from here.
Just see Beverly.
What's that?
Just see Beverly.
Oh, thank you, Bev.
If not, we can print more out.
Any
Yeah.
questions from the board?
The Oakdale plan, did they have to go up on stilts?
Oakdale plan, I'm
Oak
not sure.
Grove, or which one were you saying had?
Orchard Dale Water District in Whittier. I don't know what we're going to do there. They have other problems too with the reservoir. They have a 1.5 million concrete gallon reservoir that is not earthquake retrofitted and can't be retrofitted. And there's a big church on one side of it, an elementary school on the other side of it, and homes on the other sides of it. Now, it's a whole 2.26 square miles and has 25,000 residents. So it's quite compact.
Oh,
So I'm working on that, and I think Kurt's going to talk about that. One of the NOIs I did notice of interest is I did 11 NOIs for my clients off the fires in Northern California, some of them, and 8 were approved for applications. And one of them was to replace that reservoir, and it's a $3 million grant. So I'm working a lot on that. Remember, it's always 25% is your part on a FEMA grant, but you're getting 75% funded. So it's a good deal.
And that's, the board should remember that once we get this plan approved by FEMA and adopted by the board, then we can get involved with the notice of interest. And then once those are approved, then you have to write a grant. And so, as an example of how this can work, 29 Palms put in 3 NOIs, right?
Yes, I wrote 3 NOIs for them.
2 of them were approved. And now Ray is scrambling to get the grant applications written by July 1st. And one of those projects,
Gary's
which
scrambling to get it.
we need, Gary's scrambling.
Oops.
One of those projects is Ray and Mark and Gary and I met Monday. And one of those projects is to put in an interconnect between Joshua Basin and 29 Palms for emergency use. And they will fund it. FEMA will fund 75%, and 29 Palms would fund the other 25%.
25%, yes.
75, 25. But it needs approval from the board, both boards. But it's an example of what you can start applying for once you get this hazard mitigation plan in place.
Well, that's identified in their plan that there is no interconnection. They have no interconnection with anybody. Now, if something happened to all their wells, they're on their own. So I also noted it here in the hazard mitigation plan that the high desert connection cannot supply this district. There's no way it could supply this district. So it's benefit for both agencies. It gives you a little bit more backup too, because it will pump this way if you had an emergency and pump the other way if they have an emergency. So, and at no time, of course, would either one of you have to do that. If you wouldn't have to supply each other water if you didn't have the water to supply. That's an agreement that you're doing at the time. So, but there's a lot of those out there. High Desert got 3. I did 3 of them for them, and they got all 3. So now I'm scrambling to write applications for 8 projects, and 2 of them are very large projects. So,
It's nice, it keeps you off the street.
yes, it does. And not at home.
Any other questions for Gary while he's here from the board?
Did I, excuse me,
Tom?
did I hear that, or do I recall from one of the other meetings where you presented stuff that if we don't have this plan in place, that it sort of nullifies our ability to apply for certain grants and stuff, or did I misunderstand that?
No, that's absolutely correct. Without a hazard mitigation plan, you cannot apply for FEMA mitigation money. After disasters, you cannot apply for mitigation money. It's not allowed. And technically, if you do not have a hazard mitigation plan in a disaster, they can say, we're not funding any of it without a hazard mitigation plan. It's so much better and so much nicer if you have one. As I think what you're recalling is I said if you have a canyon that has a water treatment plant up there, and that water treatment plant receives $1 million worth of damage from a debris flow coming down that canyon, and you have a hazard mitigation plan, you can look up at that canyon and say, well, if I put a diversion wall up there and to divert that future flood flows away from that plant, and it's going to cost $1 million, that's an instant grant. That's instant fundable. But without a hazard mitigation plan, you get nothing to mitigate that. So FEMA's trying to make sure that agencies have a hazard mitigation plan, but there's a lot of agencies that don't have one. I bet there's more agencies that don't have one than there is that have them. And they just don't understand the benefits from it.
Yeah.
So,
Well, I'm glad that we're in the process and we'll have this resolved very shortly. Thank you, Gary.
thank you.
Okay, we'll move to item number 8, risk transfer and insurance.
So this is a topic that we brought to the Finance Committee, but I wanted to bring it to the board and Sarah is not only the HR officer and the contracting person and she's the insurance person. And when she actually brought her book into my office to show what was going on, I finally realized the extent of
Yeah.
what we're dealing with. So I've asked Sarah to present to you tonight about our insurance process. Ms. Sarah?
Good evening. So I did bring this book into Kurt's office a few weeks ago. This is just January to current. So I have books for all the subsequent prior years in my office as well. So the purpose of risk transfer in our agency is to put the onus on the contractor that we contract, or the vendor or the consultant, if something were to happen. In order for them to do that, there's two ways: is through contracts and through insurance. So the contract part we have fairly shored up. You go into negotiations, enter into a contract, you're done. But the second part is the insurance. So the insurance, you have to have the contractor provide to you on a certificate of insurance, and there's several insurances on that generally. So you have general liability, your auto, your workers' compensation, etc. Each of those insurances also requires an endorsement. Some of them require multiple endorsements. So the process of actually getting this to my office is pretty extensive, and most of the time contractors are very skilled in their skill. Someone like Gary, he knows what he's doing with hazard mitigation, but he may not know insurance as well.
I didn't, but found out.
Which is fine. We don't hire them because they're insurance professionals. So when I get the insurance, I go through it and find that 70% of the insurance certificates turned in are either incomplete or inaccurate. So at that point, I reach back out to the contractor and ask them to fix it, but they usually don't know what I'm talking about. So I just ask for permission to go straight to the broker. And most of the time the brokers know what they're talking about, but not all the time. So the process can take, I had one recently take up to 6 weeks. I counted over 40 threads of email, 5 phone calls on my end going out, 5 or 6 coming in to me to get it. And then finally, this is the kicker, 23 days later the insurance expired. So it's an ongoing process, and that's just one vendor. So this process is taking approximately 10 hours a week to get us at about a 40% compliance rate. And it just doesn't seem good enough. So I've been searching and talking to a lot of staff, people who've handled this prior to my arrival here. So what's the best option? I've called many other districts and asked them what they're doing, and found that there's actually companies that handle this. This is their expertise. So I've sought out about 5 different companies and learned what their processes are, and ended up finding one that seems to meet the needs of our district. But what's really special about them is that they're water centric. They have many other water districts that they do this process for. And essentially what happens is, instead of the insurance coming to my desk, it goes to them, or it comes to me and I send it to them. They vet it. They handle the insurance through the brokers. They have a link that they can upload all the documents to, and they have someone that's dedicated, that's an insurance professional, which I'm not, that knows what these endorsements mean. There are over 1,800 different types of endorsements, each one of them written just slightly different. So you may have one word or one sentence that changes what the coverage is. So it's pretty complex. And the worst part is, if we're not making sure that we have what we need, one claim could result in several $1 million loss. So having a company like this can help us get into a better compliance rate. And another note is, if you add up my rate of 10 hours a week, and I will say a side note, is the 10 hours a week are usually spent at home. They're not here because my 40 hours a week here is already full. So if you add that up, it's about $28,000 a year, and the company I've sought out is approximately $5,800 a year. So it's pretty dramatic. And then our compliance will be an extremely better place.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Any questions?
Any questions from the board?
I would say I completely sympathize with you. When I was reading through this many years ago, I worked for many years at an insurance brokerage, and 90% of our business was contractors.
Right.
And so every time they renewed the insurance, it was like 2 or 3 days of just solid, whosever account this was, and I would always be in there helping, typing up hundreds of certificates
Right.
with additional insured endorsements, very particular, and definitely, and every time that then, if they had another job, then they had to get a new insurance because there were different people to add on it, and indemnity stuff, and hold harmless agreements, and all this stuff. And if you don't have it, and you're waiting, and you've got a job, and you're trying to get, I had no idea, sir, doing this at home.
When I get one that comes in right, I do a happy dance.
It
It happens so seldom.
Once a year, yeah.
It really is. It's once or twice a year where it comes in right. I've got a couple of our regular vendors who now know, but we're constantly doing business, and this isn't going to change. And then with the CIP coming, it's only going to increase.
Yeah, oh,
So-
yeah. So I definitely fully understand, appreciate it, know what it means, and how much did you say these guys were a year?
Approximately 5,800, maybe 5,850. There's a
Worth it.
There's a implementation fee of about $2,800. It's one time. There's a minimum of 1 year contract, but then after that, it's, you can cancel at any time if they're not working for us.
You should know in a year definitely if it's
Sure.
working or
If
not.
it's working or not.
Good heavens.
So I'd still be on the inside handling it, but it would make it a much smaller amount.
Anyone else?
Just a quick comment. Thanks for your diligence, and it was an excellent presentation, and I also liked your visual aid.
That's scary.
Book is worth 1,000 words, huh?
I can remember when we first went with Aqua JPIA, that was one of their big things, is risk transfer.
Right.
And
Absolutely.
remember that?
Oh, yes.
Yeah, they really harped on that,
Right.
since we're basically self-insured, so congratulations on finding someone to do a lot of the grunt work.
Well,
Thank you.
thank you. I've also presented it to Aqua, so I'm hoping that they will work with the districts to get a Costco price in the
That's a
future.
great idea. Aqua GPA?
Yes.
Yeah,
Yeah.
like a preferred vendor or
Yes.
something, you know.
Great idea. Any questions from the public? Seeing none, I will move on to item number 9.
Okay.
Warren Valley Basin Boundary Modification Request.
And before I do that, I had forgotten about that, but that's a very subtle comment, in my opinion, by Sarah about, I was talking with Aqua JPIA, and they're very interested, and they're going to look into getting a preferred vendor. Like, you guys don't have a preferred vendor, but Joshua Basin Water District, Sarah comes up with the idea that maybe they could have a preferred vendor, and so they've adopted it, so thank you.
Well, they're thinking about it. I'll push it though.
All right, so this one, about a year ago, you may remember, hopefully you'll remember that we talked about the Warren Valley Basin as described in narrative by DWR, Department of Water Resources, ends at the Yucca Barrier, just this side of La Contenta, Yucca Mesa. But the map that they have shows that the Warren Valley Basin goes all the way past downtown Joshua Tree. And their rules say that their narrative supersedes their maps. So this map has been created, I perceive it as incorrect, but I don't know the history. So because of some work that the state was doing on the Sustainable Groundwater Management Act and high and medium priority basins and low basins, they found several different areas throughout the state that weren't covered by adjudicated areas or weren't covered by high priority, medium priority basins that were being managed by water districts. So with the help of Mojave Water Agency and in meetings with High Desert and ourselves and the adjudication master, Anna Garcia at Mojave Water Agency is leading the charge for both High Desert and ourselves and Mojave Water Agency, next map. And we're going to change the boundary so to more accurately reflect, we're not changing the boundary, we're going to change the map in the DWR website to more accurately reflect where the Yucca Barrier is, and that will result in the Joshua Tree subbasin being shown as it's accurately described in the narrative. And in order to do that, we need a letter from the board that says that we support the boundary change. And High Desert's doing the same thing, Mojave Water Agency's doing the same thing. So that's the background on why this letter is here, and I don't know what the recommendation was on the agenda. Yeah, that you approve the modification request and basically approve this letter so that President Luckman can sign it and we can send it in so Anna can continue to take care of our business for us. End of report.
Questions for Kurt from the board? Tom?
Yeah, no charge.
Yeah.
No, I think I got it.
Jerry?
No, I'm satisfied. Thank you.
Satisfied?
Thank you very
Any
much.
questions from the public? Here, Al? Yes, please.
Just for me. I know, huh?
Time's up, Al.
With the Al Marquez Sunfair community, we've had documentation going back to 2003, 2004 about the boundaries of the Warren Basin water aquifer and the Joshua Basin water aquifer. And the line that was determined by USGS was just east of the Joshua Tree Joshua Tree RC. I'll just say RT, but you know that
Retreat Center.
Yes.
Mental
Thank you.
physics.
And it all along, the boundary was right there with that aquifer separating between Warren Basin and Joshua Tree aquifer, that there's a barrier there. And I don't know why they want to change it. It's been like that for forever and ever. So I don't know if unless they come up with some more geological information that's more current, that disputes what was said in 2003, 2004. I don't know. I don't know why you're all going through this. Thank you.
Thanks, Al. I think that's exactly what happened.
So just to clarify, the narrative is correctly written and the map is incorrectly depicted. So what this change does is it makes the map more closely correlate to the narrative. So we're not changing where the basin is legally, narrative-wise. We're simply changing the map.
Okay, thank you. Any other questions? Seeing none, and Bill isn't here, we will move to item number 11, the general manager's report.
Do we need a motion on this?
Oh, do we need, yes, we can need a motion. Sorry.
I move that we accept the modification to the Warren Basin.
Is there a second?
Second?
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Anyone opposed? Seeing none, passes unanimously.
Okay, well this we're going to start off with a fun slide. Bob, I want you to zoom in on this slide, take a great picture and put it on YouTube, because this is our missing trailer
Yeah.
and water tank and generator. So it was taken out to well 16 on Thursday or Friday of last week. It was there over the weekend, and it was not there Monday. So someone cut the bolt, the chain, and the lock, and torqued on the gate. And if anybody happens to see this trailer, probably by now the water tank has been removed. The generator has probably been removed. But we're looking for, and no doubt the license plate has been removed. So I just wanted to take, and it's been reported to the sheriff's office, and they're doing the investigation. They responded quite promptly. I want to thank the sheriff's office. And that's just a general picture of a trailer that if your neighbor didn't used to have a trailer, and now he has a trailer, kind of looks like this. Maybe the old generator, 20-year-old generator, probably left some oil in the front left corner of the trailer. If you happen to see it, call us, and we'll be more than happy to follow up. So, YouTube. Now I want to see if YouTube works. See how many likes we can get, or whatever that is. All right, so the next one is, we've been talking in the Finance Committee and at the board about the budget, and one of the options in the, for the board to consider is taking out a loan. So I've asked Susan to do some work on where can we get loans, and this is an initial report. We'll have more details at the Finance Committee next week, a very riveting committee, as you all know.
I'll be there.
So Susan's going to talk about loans.
Yes, all right. My task was to evaluate borrowing money to pay some of those upfront costs for this construction that we're talking about, the pipeline construction that's in accordance with the already approved capital improvement plan. We're talking about $1.7 million worth of equipment that's needed for this crew, various sorts of stuff. I'm sure Mark could elaborate. Inventory, the pipe, and all those appurtenances. Wages and benefits, first year wages and benefits for that crew. Some sort of, that was exciting, yeah. Some sort of pipe storage facility. If we're going to buy a lot of inventory of pipe, we got to store it somewhere. Perhaps a temporary building. We got 5 more people, that we're talking about adding to our crew over at the yard, and then some sort of shop rehab there. Remember that the rate study provides $325,000 per year for this purpose. That's for borrowing up to $5 million. It was the intention there. And we can borrow or not borrow. Remember, our rate study provided for both of those options. An important aspect of this, and the reason for the borrowing, is that the funding occurs in arrears. So our water rates are what's going to generate that funding, but we're not going to have that money until the end of this first year. So in the first year, we can either collect, we can make enough money to do all these upfront costs, or we can make enough money to do a project. Not really both, okay? We're thinking, gosh, we've got about $3 million worth of upfront costs we want to come up with, and then it will be self-perpetuating after that. Rates will generate funding to do pipeline work in the future. Interesting aspect here, the Consumer Price Index for LA is currently 4.1, inflation 4.1%. Construction Cost Index escalates at a faster pace than the normal CPI. Okay. Due to inflation, delays increase the cost of the work. And they also mean that the money that you pay back in the future is worth less at that point in time. So that's a win-win. When you can get borrowing, you can borrow money at these kind of rates, inflation is what it is, this is a win-win. So I talked to USDA. They have a 3.125% interest rate over a 40-year term. That's a really long term. And of course, the longer the term, the lower the payments, but the more the interest. That's how that game works. So they have two interest rates. One is called the poverty rate and the other is the intermediate rate. I underline the intermediate because that's the one that appears to apply to us, unfortunately. Or I guess I should say fortunately, because the poverty rate applies when the use of the funds is for a project that is required to meet health standards. So you got to really have a problem, a water quality problem, in order to get that poverty rate. Fortunately, that's not an issue for us. Unfortunately, it results in a slightly higher interest rate. Okay. The loan then requires this reserve funding over the first 10 years. You're going to pay an extra, amount for the first 10 years to build this reserve fund. The reserve fund is used in case for any reason we default. They're going to pull that money, that's what the money's for. We would pull the money and pay the actual payment with it. But then the reserve fund makes that final payment. So you actually have 39 years of payments and the reserve fund pays that last payment. This is a lengthy process. The process to get this money takes months, many months, okay? This is nothing that we're going to get in a 3-month period, That's one of the problems here. So you can see the total payoff there, $5,298,000. If we borrow $3 million, that's $2,298,000 worth of interest over 40 years. CSD Finance Corporation. CSDA Finance is a part of or an affiliate of the CSDA, the California Special Districts Association. They're a nonprofit corporation. They do a lease purchase financing, which results in slightly higher interest rates, but it's a much simpler process. And look, you've got either 15 or 20-year loans. What did I just say about a longer-term loan? You're going to pay more interest with a lower payment. This is a higher payment, less interest, less total cost over the term. In 15 years, it would be $1,024,000 of interest. Half, I think. What did we just say? $2,298,000. Less than half of that. They have a purchase option. So after beginning in year 7, you can use this purchase option, which is basically an early payoff. So it can save you up to $297,000, roughly $298,000, and you could pay it off in year 7 or 8 or 9 or 10 or anywhere up to year 14. Pay it off early, and the benefit, the savings decreases each year as you get closer to the end. But there's another option, and at that point, if we paid it off after 7 years, and if we were fortunate enough to have that cash flow, it would actually be $700,000 worth of interest cost. You're going to take the $1,024,000 minus the $298,000, you're at roughly $700,000. So, a good option in that regard. Lastly, I talked to water boards. Clean Water State Revolving Fund is what CWSRF means. They also have a Drinking Water State Revolving Fund, and they have an Infrastructure State Revolving Fund. I should say, all of these options are tied to water quality issues, the same as what we saw with USDA. Their financing is for people who have, what does it say? Program requires projects related to protecting or improving public health, water quality, or both. I don't see that matches what our project is. Replacing pipe, existing pipe. We don't have any citations from the health department, gratefully. We're not dealing with chromium-6, which was the issue before. Replacing your pipe just doesn't meet this criteria. In addition, there's an enormous lead time involved in getting this money. It would be years potentially before we actually were awarded. You have to qualify, you get on a list, then funding occurs over some time frame. They won't even provide me a quote because you have to go through the entire application process, which is voluminous, in order to get a formal quote. So I sort of got the terms, I got the interest rate, I sort of got the terms, but this could all very much be subject to change because we don't have that agreement and that formal quote because we don't want to spend all of this time to file for an application, okay? So in addition, this may require matching funds And provide interest rate reduction. Remember, we heard about that as far as our Chromium 6, loan that we were talking about at the time. Gosh, they can get you all the way down to 0 interest, once you get to that point. So considering all of those, although Water Boards really offers the best interest rate and payback because of the interest rate, that the application process is just so lengthy. We might as well just wait the year to collect our money and then start rolling the program forward, Our intent or our understanding was that we wanted to start sooner or later, and it just doesn't really match up with Water Boards. USD loan is for 40 years. The CSD loan is 15 or 20. In that case, the 20-year options exceed that annual debt service amount that we've plugged into the rate study. Okay, so technically we can't afford the 20-year options, although we could afford the 15-year options from USDA. I'm sorry, CSDA. So many acronyms. So the USD 40-year loan offers an annual payment that is, more or less $100,000 less than CSDA. The 15-year option results in more interest paid with that loan. And USDA provides more annual cash flow because the payment is less. However, you're going to pay more in the long term because you have a protracted loan period. The CSD lease purchase entails the least amount of effort and the shortest time frame to get funding. So I think when we exclude Water Boards, because that just doesn't really fit with the timeline that at least we understand, the best interest rate is USDA. The lowest annual payment on both $3 and $5 million options is USDA. The lowest interest paid would be CSDA in both instances. The shortest term, CSDA. Earliest and fastest application and loan process, CSDA. Lowest annual cost comes from the USDA loan, remember, because it goes out for 40 years, but the lowest total cost comes from the CSDA loan. So with all these options, my recommendation would be that CSDA loan. I can answer any questions. That's all that I have.
Thank you. Questions from the board?
I would hate to encumber us for 40 years.
Yeah.
And I don't, that's a hard sell to our customers as well. If we're going to take out a loan, that would be. And the interest made a $3 million loan, almost a $6 million loan.
Right.
So.
I'm sure we'll get to look at this at the Finance Committee.
You bet.
Remind everybody
Can't
what
wait.
the most
I'll be
riveting
there.
opportunities one can have.
Gary?
I think the question's been implicitly answered, but I take it then the USDA loan, there's no way to pay it off early? You were saying that you could purchase I think it was the CSDA, but...
I'm sure that there are options. There's almost, sometimes you have at the beginning a time frame in which you can't pay off early, but most loans allow you to pay off early.
So that seems like
So-
that might be key to find out, to investigate.
Yeah.
Tom?
I think I'll wait for the finance meeting and see some of this stuff
I think
on
we're all going to be there.
paper instead of on that screen. This is very, very important.
Okay, any questions from the public? Tom?
We'll wait till after the finance.
Yeah.
We'll be talking about this some more.
Please go up there, we want you on tape.
You
Sorry?
have to go, why do I have to
Because
go?
he said he wasn't going to talk. You're going to talk. Get up there, please.
I'll get my exercise tonight.
In the past, that the Johnson Basin Water District had bond funds that the community and the ratepayers were paying on, and as a couple of years ago, that bond fund was paid off. But as of now, that the community is still not in favor of bond funds, because with the rate increases that they've had recently in the past, in the last 10 years, or 10 years, they're not in favor of bond funds. So if the district wants to go to the direction of loans from the USDA, which is presented tonight as the best option, I would think that the board would look into that a lot closer than even thinking about having a bond fund. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else? Steve?
We're not looking at bonds.
Stephen Whitman, Joshua Tree resident. I asked Susan this question a couple of months ago. What does LAIF pay us now?
Yeah, we're, I think, about 1.3 or something like that.
So what we're proposing is we pay 300% more interest to an outside agency than we receive on our invested funds. I find that a little ridiculous. I've looked at the spreads between what you receive from banks and what you receive from money market funds and what you pay to credit cards. This is just about the worst spread I've seen in a long, long time. And that was back when interest rates for credit cards were 18 to 25%. This is really not a good deal for us.
Thank you, Steve. Anyone else?
I actually have one more question I forgot to ask
Okay.
Susan. Susan, you've listed these $3 and $5 million loan amounts, but can we get loans in
Oh, yeah.
different increments than that?
Absolutely.
So might there be an option where we might get a loan from each of those two sources, depending on, you know, if the payback for a USDA loan could be quicker and there's lag time in getting the loan and we could quickly get a CSDA loan, would we possibly want to do, one of each? Something to think about.
Yeah, knowing that USDA would take quite some time to
Right.
come through, I mean, you might have like a bridge loan or something kind of that gets you through until the big loan comes,
Right,
or
right,
is that what you're
exactly,
thinking
yes.
of? Yeah. Yeah, any amount that we're interested in, they can provide, so.
Okay. thank
We
you.
have outstanding credit, we have, virtually no debt, so, we're a prime candidate for this. We look good on paper, absolutely.
Thank you.
look good, period.
Right on.
Come on, be real. Okay, so we are on item number 12.
Well, no, I'm not done
Oh,
yet.
we have the general manager. Oh, you turned it over to Susan. Give up your time. Girl.
Will you yield the remaining?
I'll yield.
Thank you, Susan.
Sure.
So, almost for the remainder of my time, I'm going to yield the floor to Mark to talk about operations.
Good evening. So we wanted to take a second to go over some of the grants that the district's both eligible for, have applied, and have already received, but would like to change moving forward. So one of those is a disadvantaged community grant to the Department of Water Resources that we received for CR6 planning. Since we're wrapping that up at the end of our bench test here, we're actually looking at changing that over into a CIP grant. And Randy Mays had contacted them last week, and we found out that that was possible to do. So that could be $130,000 towards our initial CIP projects. Hopefully, should find out for certain end of June here.
Excuse me, would you tell everyone what CIP is, please?
Yeah, capital improvement. Sorry.
In case they have a brain fart.
Absolutely. And then there's two Water Smart grants through the United States Bureau of Reclamation, two federal grants that we just applied for, both of them being for $300,000. We applied one for meter replacement and then the other for pipeline replacement as well. And I believe, let's see, when was I thinking those were gonna,
Hopefully,
word on those?
to get word,
Yeah,
the email from BOR was, we'll be getting back with you soon.
right.
So we are hopeful that we'll hear something by September or October.
Purposely vague.
So both of those applications were delivered by the deadline, and look forward to some good news on each of those. So, Randy Mays and I also went down to the Mojave Desert Air Quality Management District to take care of some business there, and sat down and talked with one of their grant people there. They have what's called a Carl Moyer grant that helps replace equipment that's no longer smog-worthy, basically. So you
Like
can
a
go from
generator.
tier 0,
Like a
right,
generator.
right, exactly. So you can go from a tier 0 to a tier 4, tier 3 to a tier 4, motor like that.
Right.
Luckily, some of our mobile generators aren't quite, because they're used for emergencies only, don't quite fit the bill for any regulatory action against us since they're used for emergencies only. But we have, our standalone generators that power these buildings. One of them feeding this building is actually on a 20-year schedule that's basically coming up at the end of the year here. The good thing about these grants is they'll actually fund 80% of the cost of the equipment as well. So the gentleman from Air Quality is going to come down here, basically fill out the application for us, work along with us. So as soon as that money comes available, you can give us a call and let us know. So. And then also moving off the grants and over to operations, well 14. Lynch had finished up on May 4th with their rehab process. We started flushing the well on May 5th. Since that point, for about the first week, we had about a 50-50 ratio of getting passing results on our present and absent for coliform and our heterotrophic plate counts. Basically, heterotrophic plate counts, or HPCs, have to be below 500 coliform forming units, or colony forming units rather, and then your coliform testing is basically either pass or fail. It's either there or it's not. So we were getting about, like I said, about a 50-50 ratio of having present samples versus absent samples. Continued flushing actually lowered HPCs down below the threshold, so we're looking good on that end. And then overnight flushing, we ran it straight for about 90 hours straight, and actually we're able to go from receiving 3 to 4 out of 8 samples present for coliform bacteria down to 1 out of 5 or 6 samples over the last few days. So things are improving at the well, and I expect that they should continue trending that way. So next plan, depending on how things look, if it's still moving in this direction, we plan to disinfect the gravel pack one last time and continue to sample. So. And then also going back to meter replacement for the grant program there, staff is also working on a request for proposals to get proposals for meter replacement. So looking forward to to get proposals for meter replacement so that we're ready to go with that once bring it back to the board, get funding for it. So.
Thank you.
You're going to yield the rest of your time?
I'll use the rest of it.
All right, so just a couple more things. Yesterday, I'll cover that later. No, I'll cover it now. Yesterday was Peace Officers Memorial Day. That's why the flags were at half-staff in our nation. And after 30 years of being in law enforcement, I want to take a moment and thank all the peace officers that work in this country and those that have fallen. So, the whole week is Police Officer Week, and if you happen to run into a police officer, you might want to say thank you. Just wanted to get that out. So, we've seen the first draft of our CEC solar grant. We're hopeful to have it reviewed by CEC with some additional work from the contractor in the next month or so. And then we'll know about the feasibility of solar. The remodel of the office will be done hopefully when this weekend, if the last of the flooring comes in. And it's looking really good. Conservation, 21% in April. It was like 3% in March. So our cumulative is 18% since June, and compared to our 2013 use levels. So that's great for conservation, bad for revenue. Part of the organizational assessment, Sarah's been working on a draft implementation plan. Staff has been working on it. We'll be taking it to the Water Resources and Operations Committee. But part of the organizational assessment also called for a strategic plan. And we've talked to a couple of contractors and asked them for some proposals. We probably won't be able to start on a strategic plan until August or late July or August because of their schedules. We haven't decided who to go with yet. And we'll certainly keep the board up front and center when we get started. And there'll be more information on that. And then we received a letter this week that I want to read. One of those thank you letters. It was directed to the general manager of the Joshua Basin Water District. It's, I might mispronounce her name, is it Weefels?
Weefels.
Weefels Cremation and Funeral Services, and they run the cemetery over here. It says, I want to thank you for your support for our project to make Joshua Tree Memorial Park more water-friendly and environmentally conscious. As the world climate continues to change and our area becomes increasingly arid, we feel very strongly that everyone must do their part to conserve. With your help, we have restored much of the desert landscape, which has reduced our water consumption by just shy of 50%. This is part of the Cash for Grass program. Cash for Grass. We are starting phase 2 of our desert landscape restoration, which will undoubtedly reduce our consumption further. Your efforts connecting us to the Mojave Water Agency's Cash for Grass program has made our important but expensive project possible. We are very proud to employ local landscaping agencies for our desert landscape restoration. Once phase 2 is complete, our restoration will have injected nearly $125,000 into the local economy. Restoring desert landscape to many parts of Joshua Tree Memorial Park will continue to have incredibly positive benefits to our park, our community, and in its own small way, our world. None of this would have been possible without the support of you and of the Joshua Basin Water District. Thank you. And that's from Mark Matthews, the President and CEO. And I'd like to give some special commendation to Kathleen, who's not here tonight. I initially spoke with Mark, and she took the bull by the horns and worked with Mojave Water Agency and the cemetery to bring it to fruition. So that's a nice little letter that we received that I wanted to share with the board. And on that, I'll yield the rest of my time back to the president, or however they do that.
Madam President, I just had a couple questions for, let's see, I had a question for Mark. I'm really so pleased that all these different grants you guys are looking at. I'd always been under the impression that you can't get grants for kind of your basic operations, but my gosh, there's things in here for equipment and pipeline and stuff. That's wonderful. Thank you very much. My gosh. And then on Kurt, we had the sample strategic plans in our cubbies. I appreciate that. It looked like it was actually done in-house at that particular district. And, it was a good model to start looking at and getting that in there. And it was really nice to get that letter from the Memorial Park. Memorial Day is coming up. They always do a great patriotic service there. You'll get a chance to see what they've been doing.
Yeah, and Kathleen wanted me to mention that she's working with them on an article for the newspaper.
Oh, good. They're great community partners.
Okay, anything, where are we? Moving on to item number 12, director reports on meetings attended, comments, and future agenda items. Kathleen is not here. I was at Farmers Market last week, and we had lots of people there. We had baby tortoises. Oh, it was hot. I mean, kids are, oh my goodness, it was wonderful. It really was. You want to say anything more about that?
It's not just the kids. Those are they're very active. They're eating in there, and they're in something that looks like one of those cake container kind of things with lots of air holes in it. It's a commercial thing, and there's a crowd around there, and it's very busy there during Turtle Month, and then we can take that opportunity to bring some of these other subjects, cultivate questions, conversations. Steve is there on Steve Whitman, who's sitting over there off camera, is there, and he's very much aware of this kind of thing, and it has been quite hectic. The booth itself that we have is actually not big enough to hold everybody in there at times. So it's all a big success, and I'm very pleased to spend Saturdays over there doing that, even though it's exhausting. It's very exhausting.
Thank you for being there.
You're welcome.
Okay, Mojave Water Agency Board of Directors, April 26th, Director Unger.
Gosh, that was a long time ago. Has anyone been to Mojave since April 26th? Wow. Well, the next person who goes then, the board's going to start voting on their final draft budget
Good.
this month. So probably the next meeting, you're going to see something. I know they divide that budget up
I
into
think
like,
that's me, actually.
oh,
Oh,
get
God,
ready.
I know.
Oh, get ready. But you know, they do so much work ahead of time with all their different, like, you know, committees and stuff. And they divide that budget into buckets. And I think after 4 years and having Kirby really explain it to me, I think when I was there on April 26th, they were talking about that first bucket, which is kind of their operating expenses. They're looking at 52 million in revenues, 49 million going on expenses. Their CFO, Kathy Kortner, she noted that their property tax income was 3.8 million higher than the previous year, and that she said that wasn't even counting the supplemental property taxes and new development taxes. And but she countered that with, you know, there was reductions due from conservation. They're looking at ways to start bringing in more revenue. A lot of it has to do with that water fix. They're looking at potentially bringing in 1.8 million in water transfers. That would be sales of any extra water that isn't allocated to any of their partners, to help them even just pay their DWR costs for their state water project water, their own infrastructure, staffing, salaries, PERS, facility and IT upgrades. Even things like the Oroville Dam consequences, that gets passed on to everybody, basin management and sciences, energy costs, grant studies, legal costs. You know, we have the same things, only they have them much larger, bigger. And this water fix, these delta tunnels, they're talking about how Mojave will raise the $1 million it needs to be a party into it. And this money it will come back to them with interest, but it needs to be paid up front. And their CFO, Kathy, said all her graphs she showed that day showed a precipitous drop in cash revenues when those water fix costs finally kick in. And Tom McCarthy, their GM, he's been really good on these water fix presentations. Some of it he takes kind of directly from their website, but he explains it as he goes along. The major signatory to this is Metropolitan Water District, and this is an agency that's comprised of several LA County cities, and they voted almost $11 billion in funding for their share, and their share is 67%. And their philosophy is distribution of costs equals distribution of benefits. So they are looking at getting 67% of the benefits to to all their agencies. And you know, there's a lot of things that are involved in this. You know, there's 1,000 acres of ecosystem restoration. They're even looking at putting in a permanent dam to address these reverse water flows north of the delta. And they are looking at, after the water fix, allocations could be 4.7 to 5.3 million acre feet, and without the water fix, drop that down to 3.5 to 3.9 million acre feet. So they're looking at, you know, future board actions to consider their participation in one of these water fix design and construction, and also a finance joint powers authority. Those things would dissolve when the construction was complete, and then that $1 million in gap funding would be reimbursed to Mojave after the first bond is issued. And I definitely am with Al on these bonds, and we know how this came up when we were talking about our own rate study, and people are questioning, what are all these bonds I'm already paying on my property taxes? GM McCarthy said, the risk of backing a 30-year bond is being worked out. But Kathy Kortner said the board's going to pay whether they're in that JPA or not. So it's real tough. They're in it, and they're also looking when we had a meeting back over at the Helen Gray last month, our representative Jim Ventura came, and he was kind of talking about what they're doing. And this was brought up in the meeting on the 26th, that they are looking at hiking their connection fees to raise revenues. And it's very controversial, certainly, but they're looking for ways where they can, raise revenue with, even something like this would be considered best practices before, going out, and asking for, if they need a loan, or if they want to do the bonds or something. So it's going to be interesting when you go to the budget meeting. And it was interesting, just a little side note, when I was pulling into the Mojave Water Agency, I was just thinking, I'm really grateful that we have them as partners. They've been very helpful. I mean, look at the way they've been helping us with things. And I just thought, I'm really grateful for this. I don't know what we do without them. We get water from them. And so I was feeling that very strongly. And then when Yvonne Hester, they always do an invocation before the meeting starts. And Yvonne Hester, she started out an invocation thanking God for their many partners at Mojave Water Agency. And so after the meeting, I kind of shared that with her. And she said, well, she said, necessity is the mother of relationships. And I thought that was nice sentiment. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, I was at the Aqua Spring Conference, and I was the only one from our board that was there. There were a lot of things that were neat, but I think that there were two things. The last lunch was going to be Carla Namath, who, actually, I didn't realize that she worked for the Department of Water Resources for several years, and she was just named the director of the Department of Water Resources, and she was going to be our lunch speaker. And the poor president of the board, it was really his first meeting as president, and he said, I can see her, she's out there on the phone, he's trying to vamp. It was so funny, the poor man. Finally he said, just smooth, and he got off the stage. Well, it turns out she was vamping for Jerry Brown. And every year in Sacramento, Jerry Brown normally comes to something, and he was our luncheon speaker.
Wow.
And it was really good to see him. He's done a lot for water. He got a standing ovation, and both coming and going. And then Carla Namath actually spoke that afternoon. They had a meeting that talked about the Oroville Dam. And I was really interested to see that many of the officers of Aqua lived in that area and were told that they had to evacuate. And it was an eye-opener to me, because you hear about all these people that have been told they have to leave their houses, but to actually hear people talk about what it was like for them packing their cars and not knowing if they'd have a home when they came back, and what they're going through to try and rebuild that dam, because that's a major, major part of the California Water Project. And there was a lot of other stuff, but I won't go through all of it. We'll be here all night. But it was a good meeting, and I was glad that I was up there. All right, future director meetings and training opportunities. ASB CSD is being sponsored by High Desert this time. It's going to be at the Roost Sports Cafe and Bar, the country club in Yucca, and that's this coming Monday. So if you want to go, talk to Bev and she will make arrangements, right? Thank you. Finance Committee?
One of the most riveting times an individual can possibly ever think about having. We'll be on the 23rd around 9 o'clock in the morning. We'll kick off promptly. Be prepared to have
riveting. Good time?
Riveting?
Riveting.
Riveting. Are we having an operations meeting?
We
That
are.
same day?
The regular,
Next
Wednesday.
month, not on the 23rd.
Oh, okay, that's what I wanted to know. And the Mojave Water Agency Board of Directors, May 24th is mine. And the Technical Advisory Committee of the Mojave Water Agency on June 7th is also mine. So I will be a busy person. With that, anything for the good of the order before we adjourn?
Just wanted to mention something really briefly that I saw in the paper today that Becky reminded me of, and that's that I saw an article that said Riverside County Congressman wants to ban lawsuits challenging California water tunnels. And Riverside County Congressman Ken Calvert wants to ban environmental lawsuits challenging a plan to build 2 gigantic tunnels to divert water from the north to the thirsty south. So.
Actually, there are a lot of things that happen with that tunnel. It'll stop the
my
river flow up there in the delta.
Oh, yeah.
There's just a lot of...
They don't know how they're going to handle that. Oh,
Yeah.
my gosh.
Okay, with that, do I have a motion for adjournment?
I move we adjourn.
All in favor? Aye. Thank you, we are adjourned. Thank you very much, Gary, thank you for being here. Could have left.